When Fire Emblem Awakening released back in 2012, it did a lot to shake up the traditional FE formula. Many praised the game as a revival of sorts that saved the series from an unceremonious death, but others resent Awakening for the myriad of changes it introduced to the series that it continues to cling to years later. Perhaps most controversial, aside from the dating sim elements, is the introduction of a pseudo-self-insert character as the protagonist. Since Awakening, Fire Emblem has fully embraced this trend for the last 4 games, with Robin, Corrin, Byleth, and the topic of today's video, Alear. Now, the matter of pseudo-self-inserts is one that could warrant an entire video unto itself, but we'll briefly go over the others as they are relevant to the actual main point of this video. See, I call them pseudo-self-inserts because, unlike true self-insert protagonists such as, say, the Dragonborn or the Chosen Undead, each of these Fire Emblem protagonists do have a base personality. You can influence their decisions and morality to an extent with dialogue options or branching paths, but there is an underlying core to who they are. For example, Robin is firmly cemented to be the strategist. Their main thing is being naturally gifted at devising tactics on the battlefield, which is why they, or rather you the player, are given command over the shepherd's troops. Corrin is supposed to be charismatic. They're friendly and outgoing, inspiring others with their kind heart and pure intentions. Byleth is perceptive. While not outwardly emotive themselves, the professor is established time and again to be extremely good at reading people, which in turn helps them come off as extremely dependable both on the battlefield and off of it. Now, all of this contributes somewhat to a thing that many call protagonist worship, in which the roster of the game seems to revolve almost entirely around the actual player character and endlessly praises them and their talents. I think this problem varies in severity between games, from being not that big of a deal to a tad overbearing. However, none of the prior 3 examples ever get quite as extreme as Alear, who is quite literally worshipped by the entire cast. Alear is the divine dragon, something the game will not let you forget as they constantly introduce themselves and are referred to as basically the Messiah. There is literally an entire religion based around the player character in Engage, and tons of other characters spend many of their supports gushing over the divine dragon. It definitely gets a little grating at times because, frankly speaking, it doesn't feel particularly deserved. Alear is regarded as a legendary figure to the people of Helios, a hero who defeated the Fell Dragon centuries ago and brought about an era of peace and prosperity before falling into a centuries-long coma. When Alear awakens, however, they establish themselves to be kind of the opposite of what most people expect. They're humble, shy, and even a little cowardly. They only win their first battle against Corrupted thanks to the intervention of Emblem Marth, as well as Queen Lumera. Honestly, I kinda love this idea, in premise. The idea that Alear is regarded as this great savior figure who simply doesn't quite live up to the hype was a hilarious but kind of welcome change of pace. While I don't dislike the previous protagonists having their special trait that defines them as a naturally qualified leader to the army, Alear not having any of that is kinda great. They're not stated to be a tactical genius like Robin, they don't have Corrin's supposed charismatic aura, they're not keen on reading people like Byleth. Alear doesn't even have a magical sword or the power to transform. All in all, they really do kind of lean on the support of the emblem rings for most of their power. This is a great setup, but I seriously dropped the ball with doing anything interesting for this idea. One of Engage's biggest issues overall is the over-reliance on nostalgia from previous Fire Emblem games, not unlike how Alear overly relies on the aforementioned emblem rings. I get that this is supposed to be an anniversary title, so having this big dynamic crossover between a bunch of Fire Emblem characters would make sense, if it weren't for the fact that we've done this exact same concept 3 separate times already. From beginning to end, Alear only ever manages to get as far as they do with the help of the emblem rings. Even though they lose the emblems no less than 3 times throughout the story, the solution in each instance is to simply just get other emblem rings or somehow take back the ones that were lost. This is such a wasted opportunity because it denies Alear any sort of meaningful growth. The first time Alear loses the emblems, they absolutely break down. Alear falls into complete despair upon realizing that they no longer have the power to engage with previous protagonists. This could have led to Alear facing their own shortcomings and inadequacies and trying to overcome them. Instead of borrowing the power of Marth and the other heroes, Alear will have to come into their own as a hero and embrace a strength all their own. Because the thing is, Alear does actually have one thing going for them. They're kind, almost to a fault. We see time and again that Alear is a modest, compassionate individual, willing to take the time to help complete strangers with relatively trivial problems over and over again. Alear helps to mend Vale's broken leg, offers their aid to Yunaka despite how clearly bizarre and suspicious she is, empathizes with others that have likewise lost their loved ones, and even insists on not being put on a pedestal because they don't want to burden others. Alear cares very deeply about Elias and the people residing within it, despite barely knowing anything about the world or its inhabitants after being asleep for over 1,000 years. Alear may not be exceptionally strong, smart, brave, or even all that divine, but their willingness to extend a hand to others in need is a genuinely admirable, even heroic trait that can become a source of strength in its own right. The game tries to put a heavy emphasis on the power of bonds and connections, and Alear forms plenty of those through their actions over the course of the game. They've got loyal retainers, skilled warriors, and the leaders of nations at their backs. Hell, Alear even manages to sway a couple of enemies over to their side. Unfortunately, the power of bonds is not what saves the day in the end. It's the power of the emblem rings. From the beginning right up until the end of the story, Alear and his allies have to rely on the strength afforded to them by past heroes, who barely get to interact with the main cast in sub-minute dialogue cutscenes. The best we really get is when Alear becomes an emblem and gains the power to engage with other allies. But even then, that power is somewhat limited. It just feels like such a massive waste that all of Alear's potential growth and development is undercut by the need to rely on the engage mechanic. This is the 17th mainline installment in the Fire Emblem franchise, and yet its protagonist is constantly being overshadowed by the protagonists of other games. Again, I get that Engage itself is an anniversary title, but you could still do something interesting with the premise. Have Alear actually learn from the previous heroes, listen to their stories, and take to heart the lessons they learned in their own worlds to better prepare for the battle against Sombron. The game tries to do something like that with the paralogs, but because those are optional, none of what the emblems say there is ever really applied in any meaningful capacity to the main game. I suppose the sad reality is that Engage, at the end of the day, really is an anniversary game at its core more than anything else. The gameplay itself is pretty good. It's got overall solid map design, and I actually do like the Engage mechanic for its functional use. I just wish it didn't come at the cost of dragging down the story and characters. If Engage really wanted to be an anniversary title above all else, I see no reason why it couldn't have focused on just building up an army from all the past Fire Emblem titles, rather than forcing its new protagonists to live in their shadow. But what do you all think? Do you think I'm being too harsh, or do you wish Alear could have gotten to hash out more of an identity for themselves? Leave your thoughts and comments down below, and until next time, stay bright.